Glenn. DJ Uyunglele now has the injury to his throwing hand, and Brock Glenn perhaps may come in and get the start against Clemson. What do you expect there?
I don't expect much. Brock Glenn, he's been the people's choice really since about midway through the opener in Dublin against Georgia Tech. And, the bottom line is he hasn't gotten it done in practice. He doesn't throw a good ball. They threw him in there on Saturday. He only had 4 attempts, but they were not pretty footballs. And I wouldn't expect anything better. I mean, the fact that DJ Uyunglele has been in there is because he's better than Brock Glenn. So the one thing Glenn gives you is the ability to escape the pocket. He's a mobile guy. He's got some quicks in him. But this guy's confidence is completely rattled after they, threw him into the situation in the Orange Bowl against Georgia. Now they have arguably coming into town one of the, if not the most improved team in college football after getting, destroyed by Georgia in week 1, Clemson. They've played much better football the last month. So I don't think it's going to be any better for Brock Glenn, but I think this is the way to look at it if you're a Florida State fan. Get him in there, then see that he can't play, then understand that he's not the answer as well. So it's Luke Kromenhoek is part of your future, or you better go out there and bring in some more quarterbacks, because I think what you'll end up seeing is that this is it for DJ Uyunglele, and it's also the end for Brock Glenn.
So let me ask you this, Rick, because at 1-4, and at least from boots on the ground for me in Tallahassee, the season's all but lost. So shouldn't you just be trotting Luke Kromenhoek out there, the true freshman out of Savannah, and just seeing what he can provide for you? Or is there something else at play here, and that's why Brock Glenn is the quarterback, at least as of right now?
Yeah, and that's what I hope. And, I don't know if it's this Saturday, but I think it's eventually down the road that is going to be the case. I mean, I only saw him practice for 2 days here in Jacksonville, and I thought without any question Kromenhoek threw the best football. But, he's a younger guy. Obviously, he's a true freshman. He's got to put on some weight. He doesn't have the experience. And, Brock Glenn has been in this system for a couple of years, so he's going to be the guy who's going to get the nod. But I think that's best-case scenario for Florida State fans is that, DJ leaves after this year. Brock Glenn, you find out he can't play, let him hit the transfer portal. And then you go with Luke Kromenhoek, and, they got the kid out of Mandarin who's injured right now, who's coming in as a true freshman. They also have Tavares Jackson, who's a backup right now at Florida State. But, this is really problematic because if you look at Jordan Travis and what he did, it was absolutely incredible. But if you look at every other quarterback that Mike Norvell has had since he was at Florida State, he hasn't developed any of them. And that's a concern. He's supposed to be an offensive mind and a quarterback type of coach, and it just hasn't worked out so far for him.
Rick, it's probably not the week to talk about it because of how Clemson's defense plays, but do you see any way that Florida State can get their run game going at all? I know there was a little bit of it against Cal, but it was Cal.
No, and they were 4th worst in college football going into the matchup against SMU. They averaged 67.5 yards a game. They picked up 75 Saturday night in Dallas. They cannot run the football, and that's the only way you're going to beat Clemson is to try to slow things down a little bit and put together these long drives, and they just can't do it. Florida State right now is 14 for 52 in offensive drives. Think about that. 8 touchdowns, 6 field goals, 14 for 52, 26.9%. It's among the worst in all of college football. They have 13 turnovers. They can't run the ball. And even in games in which they've been trailing, where you would think that their opponent would be on their heels a little bit and give up, what's in front of them, Florida State is in a pattern right now where they've gone 8 consecutive games where they haven't been able to pick up 300 total yards of offense. That is absolutely, totally abysmal. 8 straight games where they can't pick up 300 yards of offense. I mean, we're talking about Florida State here. So, they can't score. They can't move the ball. This is the worst-case scenario for them. This is a hungry Clemson team. You remember how they lost last year. It was a very tight ball game that went into overtime, and Florida State won. So there's going to be a long evening in God's country.
Certainly it might be. Dabo Swinney, I saw him answer a question about Florida State, and of course a few years ago FSU decided not to have that game against Clemson during COVID. Do you think that Dabo harbors any of that?
I think it's a good talking point. I don't think they need any more motivation, but that'll certainly provide it. I think last year's game is enough. And, let's face the facts. Clemson is the better team. I mean, we'll find out about Duke. They're off to an undefeated start. Florida State gets them a week from Friday night. But, it feels like we're headed towards a collision course here with Miami and Clemson, who do not face one another this year in the regular season, so they'll meet for the Atlantic Coast Conference Championship game. Maybe a little spark. I'm sure they printed that out and dropped it at everyone's locker just to remind those players as to what happened a couple of years ago. But I don't think Clemson is going to need any motivation. It's still Florida State. They're still going into that building. So even though Florida State's down, I think Clemson will be totally fired up for the game.
Rick Ballou joining us on the Garber Automall Hotline, talking Noles. The Noles, of course, will be hosting Clemson this Saturday evening in God's country. Rick, the heralded Florida State defensive front has obviously been a disappointment this year. I think the secondary, though, was also something that was promised that at least has shown some returns. What do you make of the state of that defense out in Tallahassee as they get ready for this battle with the Tigers?
Well, the one position group you didn't mention was linebackers, and that was obviously their Achilles heel. And it has not been a good start to the season for them. The secondary has been a disappointment, but I think you touched upon it. They're just not getting pressures. They're not getting what you wanted from Marvin Jones Jr. and Patrick Payton. Payton played well against Cal 2 weeks ago. Josh Farmer did as well, and certainly in that fourth quarter in their only victory against Cal, Marvin Jones Jr. had a very good fourth quarter where he picked up a couple of sacks. But in the other four games, it hasn't worked out well for that defensive line. And, we've talked about it with the Jaguars over the years. If you're not getting pressure on quarterbacks, I don't care how good you are in the secondary, you're going to get picked apart. I do think that A.Z. Thomas is an NFL player. I think Shaheem Brown is a strong safety, is an NFL player. They've had problems at nickel. I thought that Earl Little Jr., the transfer from Alabama, would come in and really take over that role. He is not. They've gone with the veteran Kevin Knowles, who's been beaten, just pretty much all the time. Fentrell Cypress is a guy that there was some talk maybe a year ago. He would go to the NFL draft. He came back. He's a transfer from Virginia. He has not played well. I still think Quindarius Jones is the answer there on the other side of corner. So, a long-winded answer. It's been a disappointment. I think part of it is the scheme. I think the other part of it is they're just not getting any pass rush pressure. Therefore, the contain has given up a lot of big plays.
Rick, what are your thoughts on Cade Klubnik when it comes to the offense so far and how he's kind of handling it there in Clemson?
Much improved. I mean, he looked terrible against Georgia. They only went over the 50-yard line twice. Georgia was completely dominant in that performance. And you hear coaches all the time say the biggest improvement we'll make as a football team is between week 1 and week 2. But Klubnik has really settled down. Phil Maffa is a tremendous back, and he's getting basically all the carries now, which he split, over the last couple of years. He's got young, talented wide receivers, and Clemson's lost so much off their defense the last couple of years, but they're really starting to reap the benefits of guys who have been in the program for years. I mean, you look at their front four; they've got a couple of seniors there. Their linebacking core has got a couple of seniors there, guys who didn't play necessarily early, but stayed within the program. We know that Dabo Swinney is he doesn't use the transfer portal like these other colleges that we do talk about. So Klubnik got off to maybe the worst start that anyone could in week 1, but he has been much improved. And, he's a guy who can make the passes. He's also a guy, when asked, can tuck the ball and pick up yards with his feet.
So, Rick, when it comes to the Jaguars, we talk about, is it the coaches, is it the players who should shoulder the most blame? How do you feel about that? I mean, Mike Norvell on some ESPN lists ahead of the season was a top 5 college football coach. Is it the coaches or the players?
Well, the easy answer, it's both. But I'm more on the coaches. I think they are, I think significant changes have to be made. Florida State has arguably the best punter and kicker combination in college football, yet their special teams are absolutely atrocious. I know you ladies watched the game. They forced a 3-and-out when they were getting back in it. They got a defensive face mask off the line of scrimmage on a punt, okay? And so in my world, that's a turnover. You're getting the ball back at your own 40-yard line. You force SMU to go 3-and-out. You get a defensive face mask on a punt. It is absolutely absurd. And then, they snapped the ball over the punter's head at SMU after Florida State ran consecutive quarterback sneaks, both on 3rd down and 4th down, very similar, by the way, to what Trevor Lawrence did on his 4th down sneak. It just there's no explanation for it. And because of the punt, that it becomes a kickoff, which basically is a punt, a safety kickoff. There's not a SMU player within 15 yards of Keziah Holmes, and the man calls a fair catch. I mean, how does that happen? You've got 50.
Uh-oh. There he is.
I've never seen a fair catch on a punt, on a safety punt. So it's just one thing after another. Adam Fuller's terrible. He should have been fired 3 years ago. Ronnie Dugans was such a great football player at Florida State as a wide receiver. Florida State produces 0 wide receivers. And don't Keon Colmy or Johnny Wilson me, because they came from Michigan State and Arizona State. Florida State produces 0 wide receivers. Miami does. Florida does. All the schools around them do. There's so much speed and talent in this state, yet Florida State can't coach them up when they get them. So my answer is I'd fire every coach on this staff. They can't fire Mike Norvell because they owe him $65 million. He's a marriage that, it's like you can fire Billy Napier, you can fire Doug Peterson. You're married to Trevor Lawrence for at least 5 more years with that 6.5-year contract he has left. You can't fire Mike Norvell. You married him, and you have him for at least 5, maybe 6 more years.
Your call briefly dropped as you were discussing Keziah Holmes at length, Rick. And honestly, Taylor, Lauren, and I looked at each other and we were like, my goodness, the gods in God's country have taken Rick from us because they've striked down because they said, no, you're not allowed to bash the special teams because punting is winning and justice for Fitzy too.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, what I said is that it was a free kick.
Oh yeah, no, we ended up getting most of your most of it. Yeah, no, but it was a brief drop off.
It was my best moment in the history of radio, 33 plus years, and it got dropped off.
Well, most importantly, Rick, I'm about to text Trent, our content producer, because, your point about the marriage between Florida State and Mike Norvell and the marriage between the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence, I think that's the best way you can put it right now. I had multiple people in Houston this weekend ask me, is Mike Norvell going to get fired? And the answer is no, for the same reason that Trevor Lawrence is not going anywhere in Jacksonville.
And I think the difference there is that Trevor, I still think, has a chance. Mike Norvell cannot coach. And Florida State fans, I was on him when he got there. I still haven't gotten over them not playing a prevent defense against Jacksonville State. Others can turn the page and move on with their wonderful lives. But people like me can't get over that. You cannot lose to Jacksonville State the way that they did by playing a regular, their 4-2-5 regular set defense and not going to prevent. I do not think that Mike Norvell is a good coach. He had an unbelievable quarterback in Jordan Travis. Outside of that, he has been a colossal failure at Florida State.
All right, Rick. Well, we appreciate the insight as always.
It's always happy to be with you girls when Florida State's playing such great football. Thank you as always.
They call him the truth teller for a reason, folks. Ain't that the truth, Lauren and Taylor?
Hey guys, Taylor Dahl here. Thanks so much for checking out 1010XL's Seminoles page. If you're looking for more college football content, you can head over to the Gators page, or if you want some professional football content, check out our 1010XL Jaguars page.